So you will just sit there and watch us struggle. My sister Chloe screamed across the dining room table when I refused to clear her husband's $27,000 debt. I looked at her manicured nails and simply replied, "That is not my emergency." 2 hours later, my mother texted me, 27,000 or you lose this family. I cut every financial tie. 51 missed calls later, they realized I was not bluffing. Before I tell you how this family dinner completely shattered my life and exposed a massive fraud, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who finally said enough is enough. I am Maya, 32, founder of an Atlanta wealth management firm. Growing up, I was never the favorite. That title belonged to my younger sister Chloe. Whatever Chloe wanted, our mother Beatrice made sure she got it. This dynamic peaked last Sunday at family dinner. We were gathered at the Legacy Estate, the beautiful brick home my grandparents worked their entire lives to buy. The dining room table was heavy with collard greens, macaroni, and candied yams. It was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon, but peace rarely existed when my brother-in-law Trent was in the room. Trent is a 33-year-old white man who desperately overcompensates to fit into our black family. He wears expensive sneakers and constantly pitches cryptocurrency startups that never launch. Yet my mother treats him like royalty, viewing him as the ultimate symbol of social climbing. Dinner was winding down when Trent reached into his jacket for his phone. As he pulled it out, a folded paper slipped from his pocket onto the floor. It landed right next to my chair. I reached down to pick it up. The bold red letters at the top caught my eye. Final notice of default. The amount due was exactly $27,450. The room went silent as I read the number aloud. I looked at Trent, whose face instantly drained of color. He snatched the paper from my hand, stuttering about a clerical error with his latest venture. I expected Mother to lay into him. In our house, financial irresponsibility was usually a cardinal sin. But Beatrice did not even blink at him. Instead, she slowly turned her gaze across the table and locked eyes with me. "Maya," my mother said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of church matriarch authority she used to manipulate situations. "The Lord has blessed your firm with an abundance of capital this year. It is time for you to bless your brother." I stared at her, genuinely thinking I had misheard. "You want me to use my firm's capital to pay off Trent's debt?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "It is a temporary cash flow issue," Chloe chimed in, rushing to defend her husband. "Trent's startup is about to close a massive seed round. You would not understand because you do not take risks. You just sit in a boring office all day counting other people's money." "At least I have money to count, Chloe," I fired back. "Trent has not held a steady job since you two got married 3 years ago." Chloe slammed her fork down. "Do not disrespect my husband just because you are 32, single and bitter. You are just jealous because I actually have a man and a family while you go home to an empty luxury condo. You think your money makes you superior, but you are completely alone." I felt a cold, familiar anger rising in my chest. This was their classic playbook. Attack my relationship status to deflect from their own failures. "You want to talk about family support?" I asked, looking directly at my mother. "Like how you sold my fully paid-off Honda Civic when I was in graduate school, just to help fund Chloe's lavish destination wedding to this supposed crypto genius. You left me taking the bus for 2 years so they could have ice sculptures and a live band." "That was different," Beatrice snapped, adjusting her posture. "Your sister needed a proper start to her marriage. You were just studying. You did not need a car. Now Trent needs a bridge loan. Family supports family, Maya. We do not leave our own to drown." "I am not a bank," I said firmly, standing up from the table. "And I am certainly not funding a lifestyle you two cannot afford." Beatrice stood up as well, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You listen to me, Maya. You will wire that money to Trent by tomorrow morning, or you can consider yourself cut out of this family. You will not be welcome in this house, you will not sit at this table, and you will not be my daughter." The audacity of her ultimatum hung heavy in the stifling air of the dining room. They truly believed I would cave, just like I had done so many times in my 20s to keep the peace. I looked at my mother's furious face, then at Chloe's smug expression, and finally at Trent, who was cowardly looking down at his plate. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out the Platinum Emergency credit card. The one I knew Beatrice had secretly been letting Chloe use for weekly spa treatments and expensive brunches. I walked over to my mother's place setting. "I do not pay for love anymore," I said softly. I dropped the platinum card directly into her tall glass of iced sweet tea. I watched it sink to the bottom. "Enjoy the startup, Trent." I turned and walked out the front door, leaving my supposed family in stunned silence. I had no idea walking away would expose a financial rot that would tear our family legacy down completely. The heavy oak front door of the Legacy estate clicked shut behind me, sealing away the suffocating heat of the dining room and the stunned silence of my family. I walked down the brick pathway toward my car, my heels striking the pavement with a rhythmic certainty I had not felt in years. The humid Georgia evening air hit my face, but for the first time it felt refreshing rather than oppressive. I unlocked my car and slid into the leather driver's seat, taking a deep breath of the quiet interior. I did not cry. I did not shake. The familiar guilt that usually accompanied my family interactions was entirely absent. Instead, a cold and clinical clarity washed over me. I placed my hands on the steering wheel, preparing to pull out of the driveway, when my phone screen illuminated the dark cabin. The notifications began cascading down the glass surface in a relentless digital avalanche. The device vibrated violently against the center console, buzzing like an angry hornet. I picked it up and watched the numbers climb. 10 missed calls. 25. 40. Within the span of 5 minutes, the counter hit exactly 51 missed calls. They were split evenly between my mother Beatrice and my sister Chloe, with 2 desperate attempts from Trent sandwiched in between. They were not calling to apologize. They were panicking because their primary funding source had just walked out the door, leaving a platinum card at the bottom of a sweet tea glass. I swiped away the missed call notifications just as a new text message chimed through. It was from Beatrice. The message was brief, devoid of any maternal warmth or punctuation. 27,000 or you lose this family. I stared at those 8 words glowing in the dim light of my car. Beatrice actually believed this was a winning strategy. She honestly thought that threatening to withhold her conditional affection would send me running back to the dining room table, checkbook in hand, to rescue her unemployed white son-in-law. She relied on the old dynamic where I would bend over backward to prove my worth to a family that only valued me for my bank account. She thought I feared losing them more than I valued my own peace. She was wrong. I connected my phone to the car Bluetooth system and tapped the number for my private banking concierge. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Good evening, Miss Williams. This is Marcus from Wealth Management. How can I assist you tonight?" "Marcus, I need to make some immediate structural changes to my accounts," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I want to revoke all authorized user privileges on the primary and secondary checking accounts immediately." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his keyboard clicking rapidly in the background. "Are we reporting any cards as lost or stolen?" "No," I clarified. "Just permanently deactivated." "Next, I need to cancel the auto-pay setup for the family cellular plan. There are 4 lines on that account, including mine. Port my number to a separate individual account and sever the billing for the other 3 lines effective at midnight." The clicking continued. It was surgical. I was systematically dismantling the financial infrastructure that allowed them to live comfortably while treating me like an outcast. For years, I had footed the bill for Beatrice and Chloe to maintain their image. I paid the phone bills that kept them connected to their social circles. I paid the premium car insurance that covered Beatrice's luxury SUV and Chloe's sedan. I even covered the supplemental health insurance they claimed they desperately needed. Trent had been benefiting from those very policies while mocking my career choice, Marcus. I continued staring at the front porch of my childhood home. Cancel the auto pay for the auto insurance policies listed under my mother and sister. Cancel the health premiums. Remove them as beneficiaries from my secondary life insurance policies. I want a complete financial separation. Are you sure you want these changes to take effect immediately, Miss Williams?" Marcus asked, maintaining his professional tone despite the drastic nature of my requests. There will be no grace period for the affected parties. I am absolutely sure, I replied. The people on those accounts are no longer my financial responsibility. As Marcus processed the cancellations, a profound sense of liberation settled into my bones. With every keystroke, another chain snapped. I was saving thousands of dollars a month, but more importantly, I was taking back my power. They wanted to draw a line in the sand over $27,000 for a fraudulent crypto startup. They wanted to force me to choose between being their personal ATM and being excommunicated. I simply accepted their terms. The call with Marcus concluded with a confirmation that my accounts were now entirely isolated. I ended the call and leaned back against the headrest, watching a single porch light flicker on the estate. The financial cord was officially cut. They would find out tomorrow morning when Chloe tried to buy her daily overpriced latte, or when Beatrice tried to call her church friends to gossip about my disobedience. I put the car in drive, ready to leave the neighborhood and return to my penthouse downtown. Just as my foot pressed the accelerator, the phone rang again. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see the 50-second call from Beatrice. Instead, the caller identification displayed a name that made me pause. Pastor Davis. He was the head of the generational church my family had attended since I was a little girl. A man whose opinion Beatrice valued above all else. A man who wielded immense influence over our local community. I shifted the car back into park. Beatrice had wasted no time. She had already activated the church network. I answered the call, keeping my tone neutral. Good evening, Pastor Davis. Maya, daughter. The pastor began, his voice heavy with an exaggerated pastoral disappointment that immediately set my teeth on edge. I am calling because your mother just reached out to me in absolute tears. She is practically inconsolable, Maya. I am struggling to understand what has gotten into you. I remained silent, waiting for him to reveal the narrative Beatrice had spun. We have always known you to be a successful and blessed young woman, he continued, his tone growing more severe. But the Lord does not bless us, so we can turn our backs on our own blood. Your mother tells me you are trying to leave your sister and her husband homeless over a minor financial disagreement. Homeless, I repeated, the word tasting foreign on my tongue. Is that what she told you, Pastor? She told me you stormed out of a family dinner cursing at her and refusing to help Trent save his business, he admonished. Maya, your sister is weeping. Trent is a good man trying to build a future for his wife. Your mother says you threatened to take the roof over their heads just because you have the money to do so. Pride comes before a fall, daughter. You need to humble yourself and make this right. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. Beatrice had not just lied. She had orchestrated a preemptive strike. She knew the financial cutoff was coming, so she immediately painted me as the aggressor to the one community that could pressure me socially. She twisted my refusal to pay Trent's $27,000 debt into a fabricated story about me making them homeless. She was rallying the church to her side, preparing to launch a full-scale smear campaign against my character. Pastor Davis, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper of absolute resolve. You should pray for my mother's soul because she is lying to you. I ended the call before he could respond and threw the phone onto the passenger seat. The war had officially begun. By Monday morning, the battlefield had shifted from my mother's dining room to the glowing screen of my smartphone. I woke up at 5 a.m. to the soft hum of city traffic below my penthouse, but the real noise was waiting in my inbox. Beatrice had not just spoken to Pastor Davis. She had activated the entire prayer warrior network of Greater Hope Tabernacle. These were the women who had known me since I had ribbons in my hair. Women who equated absolute submission to elders with godliness, and who treated any form of boundaries as a direct insult to the community. The group text notifications kept rolling in, bringing a relentless stream of weaponized scriptures and generational guilt trips. I opened a message from Sister Geraldine. It read that it was a crying shame how money changes people, and that I had clearly forgotten where I came from. Aunt Shirley chimed in right after, claiming that Trent was a good man, trying his absolute best to provide for my sister. She added that successful Black women always become too arrogant and bitter to support their own families. The sheer delusion of it all made me laugh out loud in the quiet of my gleaming white kitchen. They were fiercely defending a 33-year-old white man who refused to hold a steady job while viciously attacking the black woman who had literally funded their church roof renovations just last spring. Beatrice had spun a masterful and deeply manipulative narrative. She had painted Trent as a hardworking entrepreneur, facing a minor temporary setback, and me as the greedy, heartless spinster sister who would rather see her own blood out on the street than part with a few pennies. They demanded I apologize immediately. They demanded I write the check today. They quoted Bible verses about charity and forgiveness, completely ignoring the fact that my sister had mocked my single status, and my mother had demanded my money like a mob boss collecting a debt. A younger, more fragile version of me would have drafted a 1,000-word response defending my character. I would have taken screenshots of the bank statements proving exactly how much financial support I had already given them over the years. I would have begged for them to see my side of the story and understand my pain. But that version of Maya died the moment my mother dropped that ultimatum at the dinner table. You cannot reason with people who are firmly committed to misunderstanding you. I tossed the phone onto the cold granite countertop and poured myself a cup of black coffee. If Beatrice wanted to make this about Trent's supposedly noble business ventures, then it was time to look into exactly what kind of business he was conducting behind closed doors. I walked into my home office and opened my laptop. I did not need to fight with the church aunties in a group chat. I needed hard, undeniable ammunition. I dialed the direct line for Leon, a private investigator. My firm kept on retainer for deep dive, corporate background checks. Leon was a former forensic accountant who could track a missing dollar through a maze of offshore shell companies while blindfolded. He answered on the second ring. I skipped the pleasantries entirely. I told him I needed an emergency financial background check on my brother-in-law. I gave him Trent's full legal name, his social security number, and the exact amount listed on the default notice from the dining room floor, which was $27,450. I told Leon to find out exactly who issued that final notice and what the money was originally intended for. I fully expected it to be a shady cryptocurrency exchange gone wrong, or a predatory loan shark who was calling in a marker. Leon promised to drop his current caseload and make my request his absolute top priority. While Leon worked, I went about my normal morning routine, dressing in a tailored navy suit and preparing notes for my upcoming board meeting. My phone continued to vibrate on the vanity with scolding messages from the church congregation. Beatrice was working overtime playing the grieving, heartbroken mother to absolute perfection. I imagined her sitting in the church administrative office dabbing her eyes with a tissue while everyone patted her back and praised Trent for being such a resilient young man. The hypocrisy was nauseating, but it only fueled my cold determination. I was stepping onto the private elevator to head down to my car when Leon called back. It had been less than 45 minutes. That level of speed usually meant the paper trail was incredibly sloppy, and the fraud was glaringly obvious. I answered the call, bracing myself for news of a failed Bitcoin scam or a maxed-out business credit card that Chloe had co-signed. Leon did not bother with a greeting either. He told me I was going to want to sit down for this information. I leaned heavily against the cool metal wall of the elevator and told him to just give me the facts straight. The default notice Trent dropped was not from a bank or a venture capital firm, Leon explained, his voice deadly serious, echoing through the small space. It was a formal demand for restitution from the legal counsel representing the Atlanta Youth Futures Foundation. I froze completely. I knew that foundation intimately. It was a prominent local charity that provided college scholarships and after-school programs for underprivileged Black children in our district. I asked Leon what a youth charity had to do with Trent's supposed startup debt. Leon let out a harsh, heavy breath. It is not a startup debt, Maya. Trent never invested that money into any business or crypto venture. He embezzled it. Leon revealed that Trent was hired as a freelance financial consultant for the charity 3 months ago to help modernize their digital donation processing system. Instead of upgrading their software, he siphoned exactly $27,450 from the Youth Scholarship Fund directly into a private offshore account. The charity board caught the discrepancy during a routine audit and gave him an ultimatum. repay the stolen funds in full by the end of the month, or they go directly to the federal authorities to press charges for wire fraud. I stepped out of the elevator into the concrete parking garage, my mind racing as the massive puzzle pieces violently snapped together. My mother did not just want me to fund a bad investment. Beatrice and Chloe were actively trying to use my hard-earned wealth to keep Trent out of a federal penitentiary for stealing from a charity designed to help children in our own community. I gripped the steering wheel, letting the weight of Leon's revelations settle over me. Trent was not a failed businessman. He was a criminal. My mother and sister were willing to drain my accounts to cover up a federal crime rather than hold him accountable. The drive to my wealth management firm felt like moving through a vacuum. The bustling city streets and the heavy morning traffic blurred past, but my internal focus remained completely razor-sharp. By the time I pulled into the underground parking structure, my strategy was locked in place. I rode the private elevator up to the 14th floor, where the glass doors usually offered a sanctuary of hushed professionalism. We managed portfolios for professional athletes and generational old money families. Absolute discretion and quiet elegance were the cornerstones of my business. But today, that sanctuary was under a deliberate hostile siege. The steel elevator doors slid open, and a wall of chaotic noise hit me. It was not the usual low murmur of financial advisors and ringing phones. It was the high-pitched theatrical wailing of my younger sister. Chloe was sitting on a velvet sofa in the center of the reception area, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly. Standing beside her with one hand resting protectively on her shoulder was Trent. I was wearing an ill-fitting gray suit, trying to look like a burdened but noble patriarch shielding his fragile wife. Two of my firm's highest net worth clients, an older married couple who trusted me with their entire retirement fund, were sitting opposite them, looking incredibly uncomfortable. My receptionist was frantically dialing the building's security desk. Chloe and Trent had bypassed the ground floor security protocols, using the family access pass I foolishly gave Chloe 3 years ago. As soon as Chloe saw me step out of the elevator, her performance escalated. She threw her hands in the air and let out a dramatic gasp, making sure every client and employee in the lobby was watching our interaction. "Maya, how could you?" she wailed, forcing fake tears down her contoured cheeks. "How could you leave your own flesh and blood to starve out on the street?" Trent stepped forward aggressively, blocking my path to the hallway that led to my private office. He puffed out his chest, trying to look imposing and authoritative. He gave me a sickeningly condescending smile, specifically designed to make me look like a hysterical child who needed to be disciplined by the adults in the room. "Maya, we did not want to come down here and embarrass you at your place of work," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "But you left your mother in absolute tears last night. You are acting incredibly irrationally over a simple temporary business setback. Family supports family, Maya. We all make mistakes, but we do not abandon our own people. Just wire the funds to my business account today, and we will forgive this little tantrum of yours." He actually reached out to pat my shoulder. I stepped back quickly, avoiding his touch as if his hands were coated in toxic waste. I did not shrink away from his intimidation tactics. I did not lower my voice to protect their fragile pride. I stood tall in my tailored navy suit, making sure my voice carried clearly across the echoing marble floors of the reception area. "Forgive me, Trent," I said, projecting my words with crystal clarity so everyone could hear. "I am just trying to understand exactly which of your brilliant business ventures requires my immediate financial backing this morning. Is it the revolutionary cryptocurrency exchange you claimed was going public last month? Or is it the Atlanta Youth Futures Foundation?" The entire lobby went dead silent. The fake tears instantly dried up on Chloe's face. She looked at Trent with wide, terrified eyes. Trent's condescending smile vanished in an instant, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His jaw dropped slightly, but no words came out. I took a deliberate step closer to him, invading his personal space and forcing him to look me in the eye. "I just want to be absolutely sure," I said, my tone dripping with lethal precision. "Because my forensic investigator tells me that $27,450 is the exact amount you embezzled from a charity designed to help underprivileged Black children in our community." I just want to know if you plan to wire my money directly to the charity board, or if you are saving it for your federal defense attorney when they press charges for wire fraud. Chloe let out a gasp of horror, not because of the horrific crime her husband committed, but because I had exposed his felony in front of wealthy strangers and my staff. My receptionist took that moment to wave over the two building security guards who had just stepped off the freight elevator. Trent realized his public shaming was complete and his face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "You think you are untouchable just because you sit in a fancy office," he spat out, his fists clenching at his sides. The security guards firmly grabbed him by both arms, pulling him away from me. Chloe scrambled off the velvet sofa, grabbing her designer bag and rushing after them, her face flushed crimson with humiliation. I stood perfectly still, watching the guards drag my white brother-in-law backward toward the heavy service exit doors. As he struggled against their tight grip, he completely stopped trying to play the victim and finally revealed his true colors. He glared at me with venom and shouted his final desperate threat so the whole floor could hear. "Your money does not matter anyway, Maya. You can keep your little firm and your arrogant attitude. The family legacy estate is going to be mine soon, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." The heavy oak doors of the 14th floor service exit slammed shut, cutting off the sound of Trent shouting his final threat. "The family legacy estate is going to be mine soon, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." Those words hung in the chillingly quiet air of the lobby long after the security guards dragged him into the service elevator. My receptionist stood frozen behind her marble desk, her eyes wide with shock. The wealthy older couple waiting for their portfolio review exchanged uncomfortable glances. I took a slow, stabilizing breath, smoothing the lapels of my navy suit, and immediately shifted back into the professional armor I had spent a decade building. I apologized to my clients for the unexpected disruption, offered them complimentary espresso, and instructed my receptionist to escort them to conference room A. I promised to join them in 10 minutes. Then I turned on my heel and marched straight into my private corner office, locking the glass door behind me. I walked directly to my desk and hit the speed dial for Marcus, my lead financial attorney and wealth management concierge. While the line rang, I turned to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Trent's threat was not just the frantic rambling of a humiliated man being escorted out of a building. He was too specific. He targeted the one tangible asset that anchored our entire bloodline. The family legacy estate was a sprawling brick property on 4 acres of land that my grandparents had purchased in the late 1960s. It was the sacred ground of our family history. Every summer cookout, every graduation celebration, every pivotal family meeting took place in that massive backyard under the ancient oak trees. My grandfather worked 3 jobs to pay off that mortgage in full before he died, specifically to ensure his descendants would never have to worry about displacement. When my grandmother passed away 5 years ago, the deed transferred to a family trust with my mother, Beatrice, acting as the primary executor and steward. The house was supposed to be untouchable. It was our generational wealth, our anchor in a world designed to keep Black families renting and struggling. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring. I did not bother with pleasantries. I told him I needed an immediate title and deed pull on the family trust property. I recited the address from memory and instructed him to look for any recent encumbrances, liens, or structural changes to the ownership. Marcus heard the absolute urgency in my voice and immediately began typing. He told me he was pulling the county property records right now and accessing the trust documents we had on file. I paced the length of my office, my heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. The pieces of my mother's desperation were slowly assembling themselves into a horrifying picture. Beatrice had demanded $27,000 last night and threatened to disown me if I did not pay it. She had launched a vicious smear campaign through the church the very next morning. Chloe and Trent had risked public humiliation and trespassing charges just to confront me in my office lobby. That level of reckless panic did not come from a simple business failure. It came from a catastrophic financial collapse. Maya, Marcus said, his voice suddenly dropping an octave. I have the county records open. Are you sitting down? I stopped pacing and gripped the back of my leather desk chair. Tell me everything. I demanded, my voice rocky, despite the freezing sensation in my chest. The property is no longer owned free and clear, Marcus explained. 14 months ago, a massive home equity line of credit was taken out against the estate. The principal amount borrowed was $850,000. The room seemed to tilt. $850,000. That was nearly the entire equity value of my grandparents' hard-earned property. I asked Marcus how that was even legally possible. The trust explicitly stated that the property could not be leveraged or sold without the notarized signatures of all adult beneficiaries, which included me and Chloe. Beatrice was the executor, but she did not have unilateral authority to drain the equity. Marcus went silent for a moment, clicking through digital pages. He pulled up the digitized loan origination documents from the predatory lending firm that issued the cash. The documents have your signature on them, Maya, both yours and Chloe's. They are notarized by a third party. I stared at the Atlanta skyline, my blood turning to ice. I never signed a single document regarding that house. Beatrice had forged my signature. My own mother, a woman who paraded around the sanctuary of Greater Hope Tabernacle every Sunday, preaching about morality and family values, had committed felony identity theft and mortgage fraud to bypass the trust restrictions. She stole the deed to my grandparents' legacy. Where did the money go? I asked, my voice a dangerous razor-sharp whisper. Marcus traced the wire transfers. The funds were disbursed directly from the predatory lender into a corporate holding account registered under the name NextGen Crypto Innovations, LLC. He did not even need to tell me who the registered agent for that LLC was. It was Trent. Beatrice had literally mortgaged our Black generational wealth, the sacred soil of our ancestors, to fund the lavish lifestyle and fraudulent cryptocurrency scams of her unemployed white son-in-law. She was so desperate to elevate him, so obsessed with the proximity to his perceived status, that she handed him the keys to our kingdom. But the financial rot went even deeper. Trent did not invest that money into any legitimate enterprise. He used it to fund his illusion of wealth, and when the cash ran out, he stopped making the monthly payments on the massive loan. Marcus clicked open a final document and read the most devastating sentence of all. Maya, the loan is in default. It has been in default for 90 days. A formal notice of foreclosure was automatically generated by the lender this morning. The bank is seizing the estate. The $27,000 Beatrice demanded at dinner was not for a startup. It was the exact amount needed to cover the past due mortgage payments to stop the bank from initiating the foreclosure process. She tried to bully me into paying the debt to hide her own massive criminal fraud. And because I refused, the bank was now moving in to take the house. Beatrice was perfectly willing to let our family history be auctioned off to the highest bidder, just to protect Trent from facing any consequences. She chose his ego over our legacy. And now the ticking clock had officially started. I hung up the phone with Marcus and immediately dialed my mother. The line rang twice before Beatrice answered, her voice dripping with that familiar syrupy arrogance. She thought I was calling to surrender. She thought the 51 missed calls and the church aunties had finally broken my spirit. Maya, she sighed loudly into the receiver. I pray you are calling to apologize for your shameful display at my dinner table. Trent is very hurt, but he is a forgiving man. If you wire the funds by noon, we can move past this. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone as cold and hard as the marble floors of my office lobby. I know about the $850,000 mortgage, Beatrice. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the heavy, breathless silence of a liar who had just stepped onto a landmine. I know you forged my signature, I continued, pressing the advantage. I know you forged Chloe's signature too. You leveraged our grandparents' home, the only piece of real generational wealth this family has ever owned, to fund a white man crypto fantasies. And now the bank is foreclosing because your financial genius son-in-law has not made a payment in 90 days. For a brief second, I thought she might actually feel shame. I thought the sheer weight of her felony might force an apology out of her. I was wrong. Beatrice did not crumble. She attacked. How dare you speak to your mother like you are cross-examining a criminal? She shrieked, her voice echoing sharply through my office. I am the executor of that trust, Maya. It is my job to maximize the family assets. Trent is a financial visionary. Understands market trends that your little conventional banking mind could never grasp. He just needs a bridge to finalize his software launch. He is on the verge of making us millions. A visionary, I repeated incredulously. He embezzled from a children's charity and spent nearly $1 million of our family equity playing pretend on the internet. He is a fraud, Mom. He is a criminal who used our bloodline as his personal piggy bank. Stop calling him that, Beatrice screamed fiercely, protecting the pedestal she had placed him on. He is family. He elevates this family. You are just jealous because he has the courage to dream big while you hoard your money like a miser. We would not even be having this conversation if you had just done your duty. That $27,000 was the exact amount we needed to keep the bank at bay while Trent liquidates his offshore accounts. But no, you had to be selfish. You had to make a scene. If we lose this house, it is entirely your fault, Maya. You are the reason our legacy is in jeopardy. You could have saved it today, but you chose your pride over your own blood. I listened to the absolute delusion pouring through the speaker. She had committed mortgage fraud, stolen my identity, handed our ancestral home to a scam artist, and was now blaming me for refusing to pay the ransom to cover it up. The psychological manipulation was staggering. She truly believed that because I had built a successful wealth management firm, it was my absolute obligation to act as a financial shield for every disastrous decision she and her golden child made. She expected me to swallow the theft of my own signature and casually hand over tens of thousands of dollars just to protect the fragile ego of her son-in-law. I am not paying your extortion fee, and I am certainly not protecting your favorite son-in-law, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that cut straight through her hysterical yelling. You made this bed, Beatrice. You forged those documents and you handed the keys of our kingdom to a parasite. Now you can sit back and watch him lose it all. I am done being the safety net for your delusions. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the desk, watching the screen go dark. There was absolutely no point in arguing with a woman who would gladly drown her own daughter just to keep a useless man afloat. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Marcus sent me the email I had been dreading but fully expecting. The bank had officially filed the public notice of default with the county clerk. The foreclosure was now a matter of public record. The countdown had officially started. The family estate was legally slated for public auction in 30 days. The generational wealth my grandfather had literally bled for was about to be auctioned off on a courthouse step to the highest corporate bidder. I was reviewing the foreclosure documents, mapping out the legal timeline, when a notification popped up on my personal tablet. It was an alert from a social media platform I rarely checked. Someone had tagged me in a highly public video. I clicked the link and my stomach churned violently at the sight. It was Chloe. She was sitting in the living room of our grandparents' house, looking purposefully disheveled and devastated. She was wearing absolutely no makeup. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were red and puffy. She stared directly into the camera lens and began to sob uncontrollably. She did not mention the forged signatures. She did not mention Trent crypto scams or the massive secret mortgage they took out. Instead, she weaponized her tears for an audience of thousands. Please pray for my family. Chloe wept, wiping her eyes. We are losing our historic home. We asked my wealthy sister for a tiny loan to save our legacy, but she turned her back on us completely. She is a greedy, heartless sister who would rather watch her family lose their historic home than share her massive wealth. I locked the screen of my tablet, silencing Chloe's manufactured sobs. The sheer audacity of her video was staggering, but it perfectly set the stage for what I had to do next. It was the 4th of July. For as long as I could remember, the first week of July meant only one thing for our bloodline: the annual family cookout at the Legacy Estate. It was a tradition my grandfather started decades ago, a celebration of Black joy, resilience, and homeownership. But today, it was nothing more than a farewell party funded by stolen equity and built on a foundation of lies. I dressed carefully for the occasion, selecting a tailored crimson jumpsuit that projected absolute authority. I was not going to hide in my penthouse while Beatrice and Chloe painted me as the villain of their self-inflicted tragedy. I drove my car through the familiar suburban streets, pulling up to the sprawling brick house just as the afternoon sun reached its peak. Cars lined the street for blocks. I could hear the heavy bass of classic rhythm and blues thumping from the backyard speakers long before I reached the wooden side gate. The scent of hickory smoke and barbecue sauce hung thick in the humid Georgia air. I pushed open the heavy wooden gate and stepped onto the freshly cut grass. The yard was packed with dozens of relatives from my mother's side of the family. Cousins I had not seen since Thanksgiving were laughing by the pool. The church aunties were holding court in their lawn chairs under the massive oak tree, fanning themselves while balancing paper plates on their laps. I took 3 steps into the yard before someone spotted me. It was my cousin Marcus. He pointed a pair of metal grilling tongs in my direction and muttered something to the men standing next to him. Within seconds, the joyful atmosphere evaporated. The DJ abruptly cut the music, leaving an uncomfortable, deafening silence in its wake. Every single head turned to stare at me. The hostility in the air was thick enough to choke on. These were the people who had watched Chloe's tearful video. These were the congregants who had listened to my mother's sob stories at church. They did not see the woman who had quietly paid for their emergency medical bills or funded their children's college textbooks over the years. They only saw the greedy, heartless traitor who was supposedly letting their beloved gathering place be repossessed. Aunt Shirley was the first to break the silence. She struggled out of her lawn chair and marched toward me, her face twisted in absolute disgust. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here today, Maya," she spat out, stopping just a few feet away. "After what you did to your own mother. After you condemned this family to the streets." Other relatives quickly formed a tight circle around me, closing ranks like a pack of wolves. "You forgot where you came from," a voice yelled from the back. "You think your money makes you better than us?" An uncle chimed in, his arms crossed over his chest. "Sellout, traitor. We saw the video, Maya. We know you refused to help Trent save his business." The insults rained down on me from all sides. I stood perfectly still in the center of the hostile mob, letting their misplaced anger wash over me. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I just looked at their angry faces, knowing that every single one of them had been played for absolute fools by the white man currently hiding inside the house. The crowd suddenly parted like the Red Sea. Beatrice was marching down the back patio steps, her eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. Chloe trotted right behind her, clutching a tissue to her face, while Trent trailed in the rear, trying to look appropriately solemn. My mother did not hesitate. She did not ask why I was there. She walked straight up to me, and without a single word of warning, she swung her arm back and slapped me hard across the right side of my face. The sharp crack of skin against skin echoed through the silent backyard. Several aunts gasped. The impact snapped my head to the side, and a hot, stinging sensation immediately bloomed across my cheek. I tasted the metallic tang of blood where my teeth had caught the inside of my lip. Beatrice stood breathing heavily, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at my face. "You are the devil," she hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "You are a disgrace to your grandfather's name. You come to my house on the 4th of July, wearing your expensive designer clothes after destroying our family legacy. Get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." The entire yard waited for my reaction. They expected me to break down in tears. They expected me to run away in shame, just like the old Maya would have done. But the old Maya was dead. I slowly turned my head back to face my mother. I did not rub my stinging cheek. I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled, a cold, dead smile that made Beatrice take an involuntary step backward. The absolute lack of fear in my eyes completely shattered her self-righteous momentum. Trent shifted uncomfortably behind her, his eyes darting toward the side gate, as if calculating how fast he could run. I reached into my structured designer tote bag. My movements were slow and deliberate, forcing every eye in the yard to track my hands. I pulled out a thick, heavy red folder. I took one step forward, closing the distance between me and my mother. I raised the folder high in the air and slammed it down onto the wooden picnic table right next to the smoking grill. The loud thud made Chloe jump out of her skin. The music was already dead, but now even the ambient noise of the suburban neighborhood seemed to vanish entirely. I kept my hand flat on the heavy red cover for a brief second, allowing the thick anticipation to suffocate the yard. Every uncle who had just called me a sellout, and every aunt who had weaponized scripture against me in text messages was now staring intently at my manicured fingers. The oppressive July heat suddenly felt secondary to the burning tension radiating from the picnic table. I flipped the heavy cover open. The top page was a high-resolution printout of a bank statement blown up so large that even Aunt Shirley could read the numbers without having to search her purse for her reading glasses. I looked directly at my cousin Marcus, who was still holding his greasy grilling tongs like a weapon pointed in my direction. "You gave Trent $15,000 from your union retirement fund last month," I said, projecting my voice so it carried effortlessly all the way to the back fence. "You told everyone at church he was investing it in a proprietary algorithm that would double your money by Christmas, so you could finally pay for your daughter's college tuition." Marcus stiffened his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing. "It is none of your business what I do with my money, Maya," he growled, trying to maintain his tough exterior in front of the family. I pulled the first page from the folder and slid it smoothly across the wooden picnic table. "It is my business when my mother leverages our grandparents' historic home to cover his fraudulent tracks," I replied, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. "Take a good look, Marcus. That is the official certified ledger for next-gen crypto innovations. Do you see a proprietary algorithm anywhere on that sheet? Because I only see a massive wire transfer to a luxury car dealership in Buckhead. Trent did not invest your hard-earned retirement fund into the market. He used your money to pay the dealer markup on that silver Porsche Panamera sitting in the driveway right now." The collective gasp from the family was audible. Marcus dropped his tongs. They hit the concrete patio with a sharp metallic clatter. He lunged forward and snatched the paper from the table, his eyes frantically scanning the highlighted lines. Chloe immediately grabbed Trent's arm, her knuckles turning stark white. "Trent, Maya is lying," she shrieked, looking at her husband for reassurance. "Tell them she forged this. Tell them she is just trying to ruin us because she is jealous." But Trent could not speak. He was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, his eyes darting frantically toward the side gate, as if calculating how fast he could sprint to the street. I did not stop. I pulled out a thick stack of wire transfer confirmations and spread them across the table like a dealer revealing a winning hand at a high-stakes casino table. "Aunt Shirley," I said, turning my gaze to the woman who had led the vicious church smear campaign against me just days prior. "You remortgaged your townhouse to give him $40,000 for his brilliant startup. Here is the receipt showing that exact amount being deposited into an offshore gambling account based in the Bahamas less than 48 hours after you proudly handed him the cashier check. He blew your home equity on digital blackjack and virtual poker. He did not lose your money in a volatile market. He gambled it away while sitting on Chloe's couch drinking imported beer and laughing at your gullibility." The yard erupted into absolute bedlam. Aunt Shirley let out a guttural, agonizing cry, clutching her chest as she stumbled forward to look at the undeniable documents. Two of my cousins, who had also quietly given Trent money, began shouting aggressively, stepping toward him with their fists balled. The illusion was permanently shattered. The brilliant white startup founder. They had all worshipped the man they thought was their golden ticket to high society, and financial freedom was nothing more than a common con artist who had systematically drained their life savings. Trent backed away, holding his hands up defensively. "Now wait a minute," he stammered, his voice cracking pathetically under the pressure of the advancing relatives. "I was going to pay it all back. The market just took an unexpected downturn and I had to leverage some alternative assets to cover the margin calls." Alternative assets. I laughed, a harsh, hollow sound that cut through the angry shouting. "You mean the $850,000 secret mortgage you convinced my mother to take out on this property? You mean the $27,000 you embezzled from the Atlanta Youth Futures Foundation Scholarship Fund? You are not a businessman, Trent. You are a thief who used my family's desperate need for social validation as your personal ATM." The relatives were advancing on him now, shouting furious demands for their stolen money. But then Beatrice did the unthinkable. She threw herself in front of Trent, shielding him with her own body. She spread her arms wide, physically blocking her own siblings and nephews from reaching the man who had just robbed them blind. "Stop it!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her face contorted in a mask of pure delusion. "All of you back away from him right now." The yard fell into a shocked, paralyzed silence. Beatrice turned her furious, blazing gaze back to me, completely ignoring the irrefutable proof of her son-in-law's felonies lying on the table. "He is family," she yelled, pointing an accusatory finger at my chest. "He has a brilliant mind and he just made a few minor miscalculations. You have millions of dollars, Maya. You could have easily fixed this quietly. You could have covered his debts and saved his reputation. But you wanted to come here and humiliate him. You wanted to embarrass me in front of our entire family because you are a jealous, bitter woman who cannot stand to see her sister happily married to a man of high status." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, completely fascinated by the terrifying depth of her sickness. She was willing to let her entire family go bankrupt. She was willing to sacrifice the very home we were standing at just to maintain the toxic illusion that her daughter had secured a wealthy white husband. She prioritized his imaginary prestige over the survival of her own blood. "Get out of my yard!" Beatrice commanded, her voice trembling with absolute rage. "You are no daughter of mine. You are banished from this family, and you are banished from this property forever. Never step foot on this grass again." I looked around at the furious relatives, the sweating con artist, the sobbing sister, and the delusional matriarch. I slowly zipped up my designer tote bag. I looked at Beatrice and smiled a smile so cold it could have frozen the summer air. Enjoy the yard," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "You have exactly 30 days left in it." I turned my back on the stunned faces of my relatives and walked straight toward the heavy wooden gate. The frantic shouting erupted behind me almost immediately, but I did not look back. I could hear Aunt Shirley wailing about her lost home equity and Marcus demanding answers from Trent, but the chaotic noise faded the moment I stepped onto the quiet suburban sidewalk. My black town car was waiting exactly where I left it, parked under the shade of a massive magnolia tree. My private driver opened the rear door for me without saying a word. I slid into the air-conditioned interior and let the thick tinted windows completely block out the sight of my grandparents' historic home. The cool leather seat grounded me. My right cheek still throbbed with a dull, burning ache from where Beatrice had slapped me, but the physical pain felt entirely irrelevant. She thought physical violence and public humiliation would force me into submission, just like it did when I was a teenager. Instead, her slap only confirmed that I owed her absolutely no mercy. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out my tablet. I did not have time to sit in the back of a luxury car and process my emotions. I had a tactical financial strike to execute. I dialed Marcus, my lead financial attorney, and put him on speakerphone. He answered immediately, clearly waiting for my update. I told Marcus the cookout confrontation was over, and it went exactly as we expected. Beatrice doubled down to protect Trent and banished me from the property. Marcus let out a sharp sigh of disbelief, but I cut him off before he could offer any sympathetic platitudes. I told him we needed to move to the next phase of the strategy right now. "Marcus," I said, my voice matching the crisp, cold air circulating through the vehicle, "I want to buy the defaulted mortgage on the legacy estate. I want to buy the paper directly from the predatory lender before it ever reaches the county auction block." Marcus went quiet for a few seconds, processing the magnitude of my request. He warned me that predatory lenders dealing in subprime defaults are notoriously difficult to negotiate with because they thrive on bleeding properties dry through penalty fees. I told him I was not looking to negotiate a payment plan or beg for a grace period. I was looking to make a hostile corporate acquisition. They want liquid capital and I have an abundance of it. I instructed Marcus to contact the lending bank immediately. I told him to offer them a direct cash buyout for the entire defaulted note. They lent Trent and Beatrice $850,000. With the late fees and penalties, the total debt was likely approaching $900,000. I authorized Marcus to wire the full amount, plus a 10% premium, for an expedited same-day transfer. I wanted the transaction completed before the banks closed for the holiday weekend. Marcus agreed that a direct cash buyout would guarantee the lender drops the public auction, but he expressed concern about my name appearing on the transfer documents. He reminded me that if Beatrice saw my name on the new deed, she would immediately claim that I stole the house from her and try to drag me into a messy, prolonged family court battle. I smiled at the passing Atlanta skyline through the tinted window. I told Marcus my name would not appear on a single document. I instructed him to use one of my dormant shell companies to execute the purchase. Apex Holdings, LLC. It was a corporate entity I established 3 years ago for commercial real estate acquisitions. It had no public ties to my wealth management firm and absolutely zero connection to my personal identity. To Beatrice, Chloe, and Trent, Apex Holdings would look like just another ruthless, faceless corporate conglomerate swooping in to swallow their defaulted property. Marcus loved the strategy. He immediately got to work drafting the digital acquisition papers while I remained on the line. I listened to the rapid clicking of his keyboard as my town car glided smoothly onto the interstate. The brilliance of using Apex Holdings was not just about hiding my identity. It was about creating a psychological trap for my brother-in-law. Trent fancied himself a brilliant negotiator and a high-rolling real estate player. When he saw a corporate entity take over the debt, he would undoubtedly try to manipulate them to save his own skin. He would assume Apex Holdings was run by some detached investment banker who did not know the true value of the property or the desperate situation of the family living inside it. It took Marcus exactly 47 minutes to navigate the corporate bureaucracy of the predatory lender. They were more than happy to offload a toxic defaulted asset for an immediate cash premium. The lender sent over the digital transfer documents, and I authorized the wire transfer directly from my private banking portal. I watched the progress bar load on my tablet screen. Each percentage point represented a piece of my family history being wrested away from the incompetent hands of my mother. When the screen flashed green indicating the transfer was complete, a profound sense of absolute control washed over me. Marcus confirmed the receipt of the documents. Maya, he said, his voice filled with professional awe. The transaction is fully executed and recorded. Apex Holdings LLC is now the sole owner of the debt and the deed. The original mortgage contract has been completely dissolved and absorbed into your corporate portfolio. The predatory lender has relinquished all rights to the property. I locked my tablet screen and leaned back against the plush leather seat. I did not just pay off their debt to save them. By purchasing the deed outright, I had legally acquired the entire property. The legacy estate, the backyard where my mother had just slapped me, the house where Trent was currently hiding like a coward, now belonged entirely to my corporate shell company. I was no longer the banished daughter. I was no longer the discarded scapegoat who was forced to fund their delusions. I was legally their landlord. Beatrice and Chloe were now occupying my property, and Trent was living under a roof that my money controlled. The 30-day eviction clock I had warned them about at the cookout was no longer an empty threat. It was a legally binding corporate mandate. I stared out the window as my town car pulled up to my downtown high-rise, fully prepared to let them squirm in the corporate web I had just built around them. My town car glided to a smooth halt in the private underground garage of my downtown high-rise. I stepped out into the cool, artificial air, feeling more grounded than I had in 3 decades. I took the private elevator up to my penthouse, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and simply waited. When you build a trap designed for greedy, desperate people, you do not have to chase them. You just have to let the walls close in and wait for them to gnaw their own limbs off to escape. I knew the timeline intimately. The charity board had given Trent until the end of the month to return the embezzled scholarship funds before they handed his file over to the federal authorities. The clock was ticking loudly in his ear. Add the fact that a massive corporate conglomerate had just acquired the defaulted mortgage on the legacy estate, and Trent was entirely out of options. He was a cornered rat facing federal prison and imminent homelessness. It took exactly 48 hours for the rat to bite the cheese. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing international market trends when my phone lit up with a priority call from Marcus. He did not even wait for me to say hello. Maya, he said, his voice laced with absolute disgust and professional amusement. You called it perfectly. We just got a hit on the Apex Holdings corporate contact line. I smiled, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. Tell me the golden boy is trying to negotiate, I said. Marcus let out a dry laugh. Negotiate is a generous word. He is begging. Trent called the customer service number listed on the public foreclosure filing. He bypassed the lower-level representatives and demanded to speak to an acquisitions manager. I took the call under my proxy alias. Maya, he is sweating bullets. You can hear the absolute panic vibrating in his chest. He thinks he is talking to a faceless Wall Street hedge fund that just wants to flip a distressed property. What is his pitch? I asked, leaning forward. He is offering us a dirty deal, Marcus explained. Trent told me he holds the power of attorney for the family trust, which we both know is a complete lie, built on the forged documents Beatrice created. He offered to execute a deed in lieu of foreclosure. He told me he knows the eviction process in Georgia can be dragged out for months if the family decides to fight it in court or squat on the property. He offered to waive all of those rights. He promised to hand over the keys, a signed quitclaim deed, and ensure the property is completely vacant within 48 hours, saving our corporation tens of thousands in legal fees and eviction court costs. And what does the brilliant financial visionary want in return for selling out his mother-in-law? I asked, already knowing the answer. Cash for keys, Marcus said flatly. He is demanding a $50,000 buyout. He wants the funds wired immediately to a newly established routing number. He claims it is a relocation fee, but we know exactly what it is. It is his escape fund. He needs quick liquid cash to flee the state before the charity board calls the FBI. The sheer audacity of the betrayal was staggering. Beatrice had literally thrown her body in front of Trent at the cookout to shield him from the wrath of our relatives. She had slapped her own flesh and blood across the face and banished me from the family just to protect his fragile ego. She committed mortgage fraud and risked federal prison to fund his illusions of grandeur. And how does her beloved white son-in-law repay that absolute blind devotion? He secretly contacts the bank to sell the estate out from under her for pennies on the dollar. He was willing to guarantee her immediate eviction just to save his own skin. Was Chloe on the call? I asked, my voice turning to ice. That is the darkest part, Marcus replied. Trent left a voicemail before I got on the line with him. He forgot to mute the microphone before putting the phone down. I have the audio recording, Maya. You can clearly hear Chloe in the background. She was whispering frantically. She told Trent to promise we would leave all the expensive stainless steel appliances if Apex Holdings increased the payout to $60,000. She literally said, just get the cash so we can pack the car and get out of here before Mom wakes up. A chilling silence fell over my kitchen. The golden child, the daughter Beatrice worshipped and sacrificed everything for, was actively conspiring to abandon her mother to the sheriff deputies. Chloe was planning to pack her designer bags, take the corporate payout, and flee into the night, leaving Beatrice to wake up to an empty house and an eviction notice on the front door. The generational rot had finally eaten through the last remaining fibers of their loyalty. They were consuming each other. Accept the deal, I commanded, my voice sharp and decisive. Marcus paused. Maya, you do not actually want to pay them $50,000, do you? I am not paying them a single dime, Marcus, I replied. But they do not know that. Tell Trent that Apex Holdings is highly motivated to secure the property without a prolonged legal battle. Tell him the corporation agrees to his terms and will authorize a $60,000 relocation payout. But there is a catch. I outlined the trap with surgical precision. Tell him that because of the high dollar amount and the recent strict federal regulations regarding wire fraud, Apex Holdings policy requires an in-person signature for the final release of funds. No digital signatures. No remote notaries. They must come to our corporate headquarters downtown to sign the physical quitclaim deed and collect their certified payout. Make sure you emphasize that Chloe must be present to sign as well, since her name is tied to the forged trust documents. Marcus chuckled, a low, dark sound of pure understanding. You are going to bring them right into the lion den. I want them sitting in a glass boardroom expecting a massive payday, I said. I want them dreaming about their escape route. Tell them the meeting is set for tomorrow morning at 10 sharp. Send them the address for the executive suites in my building, but use the subsidiary entrance. They will think they are meeting a faceless corporate asset manager. Consider it to walk right into the slaughterhouse. I ended the call and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling city. I pictured Chloe and Trent right now, sitting in the stolen house celebrating their perceived victory. I imagined them quietly packing their suitcases, dreaming of the cash that would wash away their crimes. They were promising each other they would take the money and leave Beatrice to burn. They thought they had outsmarted everyone. They had absolutely no idea who was waiting for them at the head of that boardroom table. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of conference room, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished mahogany table. Trent and Chloe had arrived exactly 15 minutes early, just as eager, desperate people always do when they think a massive payday is imminent. From my adjoining private office, I watched them through the tinted privacy glass. They could not see me, but I had a perfect view of their absolute delusion. Chloe was wearing a fresh blowout and a designer dress she had undoubtedly purchased using my mother's credit card. She was pacing the length of the room, running her hands over the expensive leather chairs and looking out at the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. She looked like a woman who believed she had finally arrived at the social peak she always felt entitled to. Trent was leaning back in one of the executive chairs with his feet casually crossed at the ankles. He was holding a sleek silver pen, spinning it between his fingers, with a smug, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He was wearing the same ill-fitting gray suit he wore when he tried to ambush me in my lobby days earlier. He looked exactly like what he was, a mediocre con artist trying to blend into a world of actual corporate power. My assistant Marcus had set the trap perfectly. He had escorted them into the room, offered them imported sparkling water, and told them the chief executive officer would join them shortly to finalize the $60,000 relocation transfer. I pressed a button on my desk, activating the hidden microphone feed inside their conference room. The audio piped directly into my earpiece, crystal clear. Chloe was standing by the window, tapping her manicured nails against the glass. "I cannot believe it was this easy," she whispered, her voice trembling with greedy excitement. "You really got them to agree to 60 grand, Trent. This is enough to get us a luxury apartment in Miami and completely start over. Mom is going to lose her mind when the sheriff shows up tomorrow with the eviction notice, but we will be long gone by then." Trent let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "I told you I know how to handle these Wall Street hedge fund types, Chloe. They are all numbers and no brains. They just want the property vacant so they can flip it to developers. They do not care about your mother or the legacy of the house. To them, paying us 60 grand to disappear quietly is just the cost of doing business. We played this perfectly. When your mother wakes up tomorrow to an empty house, she will finally realize she should have listened to me from the start." The sheer sociopathic cruelty of their conversation was breathtaking. Chloe was actively giddy about abandoning the mother who had literally shielded her husband from an angry mob of relatives just 48 hours prior. Beatrice had committed mortgage fraud to elevate this white man, and her own daughter was currently bragging about leaving her to face federal consequences alone. They had absolutely zero loyalty to anyone but themselves. It was time to introduce them to the real cost of doing business. I stood up from my desk, smoothing the sharp lapels of my tailored white suit. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. There was no trace of the scapegoat sister, no remnant of the daughter who used to crave family validation. I looked entirely like a corporate executioner. I picked up a sleek black leather folder containing the quitclaim deed, the cash for keys agreement, and the wire fraud evidence Leon had compiled. I walked out of my private office and strode down the marble hallway toward conference room A. I did not knock. I pushed the heavy oak double doors open with a forceful thrust that made the brass handles rattle. The heavy doors swung wide, catching the attention of both occupants immediately. Chloe was still standing by the window holding her glass of sparkling water. Trent was mid-spin with his silver pen. I walked into the room, my heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. I did not look at either of them. I kept my gaze fixed, dead ahead, matching the exact energy of a ruthless executive entering a hostile negotiation. I walked straight to the head of the long mahogany table, pulled out the oversized leather chairman's seat, and sat down. I placed the black leather folder on the polished wood and finally lifted my eyes. The color completely drained from Trent's face. The smug, arrogant smirk he had been wearing vanished, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The silver pen slipped from his fingers and clattered loudly onto the table. Chloe gasped audibly. The crystal glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the floor, sending sparkling water and shards of glass flying across the expensive rug. She stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, her chest heaving as if all the oxygen had been suddenly sucked out of the room. Maya Chloe stammered, her voice barely a high-pitched squeak. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" Trent scrambled to sit up straight, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly, his knuckles turned stark white. "This is a private meeting, Maya," he demanded, his voice shaking with a pathetic attempt at false authority. "We are waiting for the CEO of Apex Holdings. You need to leave before I call security and have you escorted out of this building again." I leaned back in my oversized leather chair, steepling my fingers together and rested them on top of the black folder. I let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment, watching the realization slowly click into place behind their panicked eyes. They were sitting in my building. They were waiting in my conference room. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone dangerously calm and razor-sharp. "I am not going anywhere, Trent," I said, maintaining absolute unblinking eye contact. "You demanded an in-person meeting with the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings to finalize your $60,000 buyout. I am here to facilitate that transaction. I am Apex Holdings." Chloe let out a strangled sob, collapsing into the nearest chair. Trent's mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. The illusion of his brilliant escape plan shattered into a million irreparable pieces. They had not outsmarted a faceless Wall Street hedge fund. They had walked willingly directly into a steel trap built by the very black woman they had spent their entire lives underestimating. I opened the black folder and pulled out the quitclaim deed they were so eager to sign. "You wanted to sell out my mother for a quick cash escape." I continued pushing the documents across the table. "But we are going to have a very different kind of negotiation today." I tapped the polished wood of the conference table, sliding the crisp white papers closer to Trent. "I did not bring you here to hand you a $60,000 relocation fee, Trent. I brought you here to offer you a choice between two very distinct futures." I reached into the folder and pulled out a small, sleek black audio recorder, placing it dead center on the table. I pressed the play button. The crystal-clear audio of Trent's arrogant voice filled the boardroom, echoing off the glass walls. I was bragging about how he knew how to handle Wall Street hedge fund types. Then came Chloe, frantic whispering, telling him to secure the cash so they could pack the car and escape before Beatrice woke up. Chloe buried her face in her hands, letting out a low, guttural moan as she listened to her own treacherous words. Trent stared at the recorder, as if it were a venomous snake ready to strike. I stopped the playback, leaving the heavy silence to suffocate them. "That recording is just the appetizer," I explained, my voice devoid of any mercy. "Inside this folder, I have the complete financial forensic report detailing exactly how you embezzled $27,450 from the Atlanta Youth Futures Foundation. I have the digital paper trail tracing the stolen funds from the charity scholarship accounts directly into your offshore gambling portfolio. And more importantly, I have the origination documents for the $850,000 secret mortgage featuring my forged signature and the forged signature of your lovely wife." Trent swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his pale temple. "Maya, listen to me," he stammered, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "We can work this out. You have your money. You have the house now. There is no need to involve the authorities. We will just walk away. We will leave Atlanta today and you will never have to see us again." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. "Walking away is no longer an option, Trent. You stole from a youth charity designed to uplift black children. You manipulated a foolish woman into mortgaging our generational wealth. You are a parasite who has fed on my family for 3 years, and today is the day the host fights back." I pulled a single typed document from the back of the folder and laid it flat on the table right next to the silver pen Trent had dropped earlier. I tapped the bottom signature line. "This is a legally binding full confession," I stated, my eyes locked onto his terrified face. "It details every single financial crime you committed over the past 14 months. It outlines the charity embezzlement, the offshore gambling, the wire fraud, and the elder abuse you committed by financially exploiting Beatrice. You are going to pick up that pen and sign your name right now." Trent physically recoiled, pressing his back against the leather executive chair. I cannot sign that, he whispered, shaking his head frantically. If I sign that I am giving you a loaded gun, you could send me to federal prison for a decade. I am holding the loaded gun either way, Trent. I countered, my tone dropping to a lethal calm. If you sign the confession, I will allow you to walk out of this building today. I will not hand the folder over to the authorities immediately. It will remain in my vault as absolute leverage, ensuring you never step foot near my assets or my business ever again. But if you refuse to sign it, I will instruct my security team to lock these boardroom doors. I will press one button on my phone and transmit this entire digital dossier directly to my contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They will be waiting for you in the lobby before you even reach the ground floor. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. Trent looked wildly around the glass-walled room as if searching for a hidden exit. He looked at the heavy double doors, then at the sheer drop of the window behind me. He was completely trapped. Chloe finally lifted her head, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. Trent, we cannot go to jail, she sobbed, grabbing his sleeve. Tell her you will fix it. Tell her it was just a business mistake. Trent violently yanked his arm away from his wife, his face contorting into a mask of pure selfish panic. The mask of the loving, protective husband disintegrated instantly. Shut up, Chloe, he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. Just shut up. He turned back to me, his eyes wide and pleading. He threw his hands toward his wife in a gesture of absolute betrayal. It was her idea, Maya, he yelled, throwing Chloe completely under the bus to save his own skin. I did not want to touch the house. Chloe is the one who convinced Beatrice to take out the mortgage. She is the one who said you would never find out because you never visited the estate anymore. She knew about the charity money too. She knew the whole time. Chloe gasped, her jaw dropping open in utter disbelief. She stared at the man she had idolized, the man she had helped destroy our family legacy for, and watched him turn into a cornered coward, willing to sacrifice her without a second thought. Trent, how could you? She choked out, her voice breaking into a devastated whisper. I did it for you, Trent yelled back, pointing an accusing finger at her face. You were the one complaining about your friends having designer bags and luxury cars. You were the one whining that Maya had all the wealth while you were stuck living on a budget. You pushed me to get that cash. You forged the signatures with your mother. Trent's accusation hung in the sterile air of the boardroom, completely shattering the illusion of their perfect marriage. Chloe stared at the man she had worshipped for 3 years, the man our mother had practically crowned king of our family. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no words came out. The designer dress she wore suddenly looked like a cheap costume on a woman who had just lost everything. She looked from Trent to me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading panic. Maya, you have to believe me, Chloe stammered, her voice cracking into a pathetic whine. I did not know he was going to steal the charity money. I only knew about the house. I just wanted us to have nice things. Mom said it was fine because she was the executor. She told me you would never find out because you never bothered to visit the estate anyway. I did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked at my younger sister with absolute disgust. You helped steal our grandparents' legacy. Chloe, I stated, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. You conspired to strip the generational wealth from this family so you could buy designer handbags and pretend you were married to a millionaire. You are just as guilty as he is, and now you are going to pay the exact same price. I tapped the polished wood of the table right next to the printed confession. Sign the paper, Chloe. Admit to your role in the mortgage fraud, or I will gladly hand this entire portfolio to the federal investigators. You can explain your desperate need for nice things to a federal judge during your sentencing hearing. Chloe let out a high-pitched wail of absolute terror. She backed away from the table, shaking her head violently from side to side. Her hands flew to her hair, ruining her expensive blowout as she spiraled into a full-blown panic attack. I am not going to jail, she screamed, her voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. I am not signing anything. I am calling Mom. Mom will fix this. Mom always fixes this. She frantically dug into her designer purse, pulling out her smartphone with trembling hands. She did not even look at Trent again. The man she had aggressively defended against our entire extended family, just days prior, was now completely dead to her. She turned on her expensive heels and sprinted toward the heavy oak double doors, pushing them open with all her body weight. She ran down the marble hallway, sobbing loudly and screaming for our mother into the phone. The heavy doors swung shut behind her, sealing Trent and me inside the boardroom. I turned my attention back to my white brother-in-law. He was sweating profusely, his ill-fitting gray suit clinging to his damp shoulders. His golden ticket had just run out of the room, crying for her mommy. He was completely alone with the one black woman in the family he could never manipulate. "She is not going to save you, Trent," I said softly, pushing the silver pen closer to his trembling hands. "Beatrice cannot forge another document to get you out of federal wire fraud. You have exactly 30 seconds to sign that confession before I alert building security to lock this floor and call the authorities." Trent looked at the door Chloe had just run through and then down at the crisp white paper, detailing his massive financial crimes. The arrogance that had defined his entire existence in our family was completely gone. He was nothing but a terrified coward facing the very real threat of a concrete cell. His hand shook violently as he reached out and picked up the silver pen. He did not read the document. He already knew exactly what he had done. He pressed the pen to the signature line and scribbled his name across the bottom of the page. He dropped the pen as if it had burned his skin. "I did what you asked," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "You have your confession. I am leaving Atlanta today. You will never see me again." I reached across the table and smoothly pulled the signed confession toward me, slipping it securely into the black leather folder. "You are forgetting one thing, Trent," I said, maintaining my icy composure. "You are leaving with exactly what you brought into this family. Nothing." Trent stared at me for a long moment, processing the finality of his defeat. He looked down at his left hand, at the gold wedding band Beatrice had proudly helped pay for. Slowly he reached over and pulled the ring off his finger. The metal made a quiet clinking sound as he placed it gently onto the center of the mahogany boardroom table. It was the ultimate surrender. He was discarding his marriage and his entry pass into our family bloodline just to save his own skin. He stood up from the executive chair, keeping his eyes glued to the floor. He turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving his wedding ring behind like a piece of worthless trash. I sat alone in the quiet, glass-walled room, listening to the faint click of the elevator doors closing in the hallway. I had won. I had secured the confession, neutralized the immediate threat, and successfully purged the parasite from our family tree. I picked up the gold ring, dropping it into the trash can by the door, and carried my black folder back to my private corner office. The victory, however, was only the beginning of the war. I knew Beatrice would not simply accept defeat. I placed the folder securely into my locked desk drawer. The silence in my office was a stark contrast to the absolute devastation I had just orchestrated. I poured myself a glass of iced water and stood by the window looking down at the street below, anticipating the arrival of the matriarch. It took exactly 1 hour. My office phone buzzed with an urgent notification from the security desk downstairs. But before my receptionist could even transfer the call, the heavy glass door to my private suite was violently thrown open. Beatrice stormed into my office like a raging hurricane. She had clearly rushed downtown the moment Chloe called her. She was wearing a mismatched blouse and slacks, her usually pristine church hair slightly out of place. Her face was flushed dark red with absolute fury. Chloe was not with her. Beatrice had come to fight this battle alone, operating under the severe delusion that she still held any authority over my life or my assets. She marched directly up to my desk, slamming her hands down flat onto the polished glass surface. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a toxic mixture of desperation and maternal rage. "You listen to me right now, Maya," she demanded, her voice shaking the framed credentials on my office wall. "I do not care what kind of corporate games you think you are playing. You are going to tear up those foreclosure papers immediately. You are going to sign that house back over to the family trust, and you are going to pick up your phone and give Chloe her husband back right this second." I stared at the woman leaning over my desk. Her hands were planted firmly on the polished glass surface, her knuckles white with rage. For 32 years, this exact posture had struck absolute terror into my heart. This was the stance of the unquestioned matriarch. the woman who commanded respect in the church pews and demanded absolute submission within the walls of our family home. But today her furious glaring had no effect on me whatsoever. I did not shrink back into my leather chair. I did not lower my eyes in deference. I simply looked at her mismatched blouse and the frantic sweat beading on her forehead and felt nothing but clinical detachment. "Give Chloe her husband back," I repeated, keeping my voice leveled and dangerously quiet. "Do you honestly believe I have Trent locked in a closet somewhere, Beatrice? Your golden son-in-law practically tripped over his own feet running out of this building. He traded his wedding ring for a signed confession to avoid a federal indictment. He threw your precious Chloe to the wolves the second his own freedom was threatened. I did not take him from her. He abandoned her just like he was planning to abandon you." Beatrice slammed her hand against the glass, a sharp cracking sound that echoed through the suite. "That is a lie," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "Trent was stressed. He made a mistake and you backed him into a corner. You manipulated the situation to destroy your sister's marriage because you have always been jealous of her happiness. You have always hated that she found love while you chose to be alone. You are my flesh and blood, Maya. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you in the church to understand the sacred value of family. How can you sit there in your expensive suit and completely destroy your own bloodline over money?" She was pulling out of the heavy artillery now. The generational guilt trip. The weaponized maternal sacrifice. It was the exact same script she used when she forced me to hand over my savings to pay for Chloe's destination wedding. It was the same tactic she employed whenever she needed me to silently absorb the disrespect of relatives at every holiday dinner. She expected me to bow my head and apologize for succeeding. "You want to talk about the sacred value of family," I said, rising slowly from my executive chair. I walked around the desk, closing the physical distance between us until we were standing eye to eye. "Let us talk about family, Beatrice. Let us talk about how you forged my signature on a massive loan to gamble away the only property our ancestors ever owned. Let us talk about how you watched me work 80-hour weeks to build this firm from nothing. And yet you constantly belittled my career just to make Chloe feel better about doing absolutely nothing with her life." Beatrice took a slight step backward, her eyes widening as my voice remained chillingly calm. "I was a mother doing her best," she stammered defensively, trying to regain her footing. "Chloe needed support. You were always so independent, Maya. You did not need me the way she did. I did not need you because you explicitly taught me that my needs did not matter." I countered, my words slicing through her excuses like a scalpel. "When I graduated with my finance degree, you did not even show up to the ceremony because Chloe had a minor cold. When I bought my first condo, you refused to visit because the neighborhood was not upscale enough for your newly acquired country club tastes. But the moment you needed someone to fund Trent's fraudulent lifestyle, I was suddenly expected to be the loyal, dutiful black daughter. You sold my first car to buy her a wedding dress. You handed our grandparents' legacy to a white con artist just to brag to the church aunties about his imaginary wealth. You never loved me, Beatrice. You only loved what my bank account could do for your favorite child." The absolute truth hit her directly in the chest. Her mouth trembled, and for the first time her mask of supreme authority shattered entirely. The fierce matriarch vanished, replaced by a terrified woman, realizing she had fundamentally miscalculated the power dynamics of the room. She looked around my luxurious corner office, taking in the expensive artwork, the panoramic city views, and the sheer undeniable evidence of my power. She finally understood that her guilt trips held absolutely zero currency here. "Maya, please," she whispered, her voice suddenly fragile and small. "You cannot do this. We have nowhere else to go. I will make Trent pay you back. I will find a way to fix the trust. Just give me the deed to the house. Please, Maya, I am your mother." The word mother hung in the air, pathetic and hollow. I walked back behind my desk and opened the top right drawer. I reached inside and pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper. It was not a settlement offer. It was not a deed transfer. I placed the document face up on the glass desk directly in front of her. "You stopped being my mother the moment you stole my identity to fund your delusions," I said, my tone dropping to absolute freezing temperatures. "This is a formal 24-hour notice to vacate. It has been signed by a judge and registered with the county sheriff's department. Apex Holdings is officially terminating your unauthorized occupancy of the property. Beatrice stared at the bold black letters at the top of the page, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. An eviction notice. She choked out a tear, finally spilling over her eyelashes. You are throwing your own mother out onto the street. I am protecting my real estate investment from hostile squatters, I corrected coldly, pressing my finger against the bottom of the page. You and Chloe have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever you can carry and leave the premises. The sheriff will be there at noon tomorrow to escort you off the property, and my contractors will be arriving immediately after to change every single lock on the estate. Good luck gathering your boxes, Beatrice, because the authorities will not grant you a single minute of leniency when that clock runs out. Beatrice snatched the eviction notice from my desk, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. She did not say another word. She spun around and ran out of my suite, leaving a trail of absolute desperation. I watched the door shut, checking my watch. It was exactly noon on Saturday. The countdown had officially begun, and I knew where she would make her final stand. Sunday morning at Greater Hope Tabernacle always followed a very strict, predictable generational rhythm. The heavy pews were packed with families who had worshipped together for decades. The choir swayed, the organ humming underneath the vibrant noise of the congregation. It was the epicenter of social power. If you controlled the narrative here, you controlled reality. Beatrice knew her eviction clock expired at noon today. Instead of packing her belongings, she chose to set a theatrical stage. I sat in my idling car across the street watching the stained glass windows. I checked my phone. It was 10:30. My private security team was waiting at the Legacy estate alongside the sheriff deputies. Beatrice and Chloe had left the house an hour ago. They believed that if they rallied the congregation and raised public outrage, I would be shamed into tearing up the eviction notice. They thought social pressure would override a legal corporate acquisition. Inside the sanctuary, Pastor Davis approached the pulpit to announce the testimony portion of the service. Before he could finish his prayer, Beatrice rushed down the center aisle. Chloe trailed closely behind her, clutching a tissue. They dressed specifically for the occasion, wearing modest, unadorned dresses. Beatrice had forgone her usual elaborate church hat, looking intentionally stripped down and victimized. She wanted to look like a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Pastor Davis handed Beatrice the microphone. The sanctuary grew pin-drop quiet. Even the restless children stopped fidgeting. Beatrice gripped the microphone, bowing her head, as a single perfectly timed tear rolled down her cheek. She let out a trembling sob that echoed through the high ceilings. It was a masterful performance designed to pull on the heartstrings of every single person sitting in those wooden pews. Church family, she began, her voice echoing loudly, with a completely manufactured emotional wobble. I come before you today with a broken heart. I am under a spiritual attack, and the devil is using my own flesh and blood to destroy me. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. Sister Geraldine and Aunt Shirley leaned forward in the front pew. Beatrice lifted her head, looking out over the sea of familiar faces. As you all know, I dedicated my life to raising my daughters in the light, she cried. I sacrificed everything to give them a good life. But the love of money has completely poisoned my eldest daughter, Maya. She has allowed corporate greed to turn her heart to stone. She has forgotten every single lesson this church ever taught her. The organ player hit a low sustained chord, adding dramatic weight to her performance. Chloe let out a loud, tragic wail, burying her face in her hands. She leaned against the wooden altar, pretending to be entirely overcome by the tragic situation her cruel sister had placed them in. My own daughter! Beatrice wailed, pointing a shaking finger toward the ceiling. My own daughter secretly bought the bank debt on our family home, the home where my father hosted church picnics. She bought it through a shadowy corporation just so she could evict her own mother and struggling sister. At exactly noon today, while we are sitting here, the police are going to throw our belongings onto the street. She is making us homeless today to feed her massive ego. The congregation erupted into outraged whispers. Pastor Davis shook his head in solemn disappointment. Aunt Shirley shouted out a prayer for Beatrice's protection. The narrative was perfectly cast. Beatrice was the devout, suffering matriarch, and I was the ruthless corporate demon who stole Black generational wealth for sport. I am begging my church family for help. Beatrice pleaded, wiping her face. "We need emergency donations. We need an army to march down to that house and stand between us and the sheriff. We cannot let a greedy, bitter woman destroy our legacy. We need to show her that the power of this community is stronger than her dirty money." The crowd was whipped into a righteous frenzy. People were reaching into their purses. Ushers were rushing down the aisles with collection plates ready to gather a makeshift defense fund to save Beatrice from the streets. She had successfully weaponized the entire congregation against me. She stood at the altar looking like a victorious martyr. Then the massive, heavy oak doors at the very back of the sanctuary swung open with a resounding, deafening crash. The sudden noise shattered the chaotic murmuring. Bright Sunday morning sunlight poured into the dim sanctuary, casting a long, sharp shadow straight down the burgundy carpet. Every single head in the building turned toward the main entrance. I stepped through this doorway wearing an immaculate, stark white tailored suit that stood in brilliant contrast to the dark wood of the church foyer. I did not look angry. I did not look ashamed. I looked entirely like a woman who owned the ground she walked on. In my right hand, I held a sleek wireless microphone that I had instructed my audio engineer to sync perfectly to the church soundboard just minutes prior. I took a slow, deliberate step down the center aisle, letting my designer heels click softly against the hardwood floorboards. The heavy, deafening silence in the expansive room was absolute. Beatrice froze at the wooden altar, her mouth hanging open, the church microphone slipping slightly in her sweaty grip. Chloe stopped fake crying instantly and stared at me with wide, terrified eyes as the entire congregation held its breath. I slowly raised my wireless microphone directly to my lips. I did not look at my mother or my sister. My eyes swept over the crowded pews, locking directly onto the three men sitting in the second row, holding the leather-bound ledger books. "Good morning, Greater Hope Tabernacle," I said, my voice projecting with crisp, absolute authority through the state-of-the-art sound system. "I am not here to discuss my private real estate portfolio. I am not here to entertain fabricated stories about a lawful eviction. I am here to address the Greater Hope Finance Committee." Beatrice lunged forward, grabbing the wooden edges of the pulpit. "Do not listen to her!" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly through the sanctuary. "She is an agent of deception trying to confuse you. She is trying to distract you from the fact that she is throwing her own mother out onto the street today. Pastor, please cut her microphone." Pastor Davis raised his hand, signaling the sound booth, but my audio engineer had already locked them out of the system. My microphone remained live and commanding. I took 2 steps forward, planting myself firmly at the base of the altar. I pointed a single manicured finger directly at the head of the finance committee, Brother Thomas. "Brother Thomas, I advise you to open your administrative portal right now," I commanded, my tone leaving zero room for debate. "Log into the Greater Hope Youth Scholarship Fund, the account you all worked so hard to build over the last 5 years with bake sales, tithes, and community donations. The fund designed to send the hardworking Black teenagers of this congregation to college. Open it and tell this sanctuary exactly what the current balance is." Brother Thomas blinked in confusion, but the sheer weight of my demand compelled him to pull out his smartphone. He adjusted his reading glasses, his thumbs tapping awkwardly against the screen. The sanctuary was dead silent, save for the rustling of church fans and the frantic breathing of my mother on the altar. "You are trespassing!" Beatrice yelled, her composure entirely shattering as she realized the trajectory of my words. "You have no right to come into the house of the Lord and interrogate our financial officers. This is a private spiritual matter." It stopped being a private spiritual matter the moment you handed a white con artist the keys to the church treasury. "Beatrice," I shot back, my voice ringing like a gavel strike. The congregation gasped collectively. Sister Geraldine, who had texted me vile insults just days prior, stood up from her pew, clutching her pearls. Aunt Shirley lowered her fan, her eyes darting between me and the frantic matriarch at the pulpit. I turned my attention back to the congregation, refusing to let Beatrice reclaim the narrative. "My mother just stood up here and cried about a $27,000 debt." I continued, pacing slowly across the front of the aisle. "She told you I was a heartless demon for refusing to pay it. But what she conveniently forgot to mention was who that money belonged to. That debt was not a failed cryptocurrency venture. It was not a startup business loan gone wrong. It was a direct restitution demand from this very church. Brother Thomas let out a loud, choked gasp. His phone slipped from his hands and clattered against the wooden pew. He looked up, his face completely ashen, the color entirely drained from his cheeks. "Pastor," he stammered, his voice shaking with absolute horror. "The scholarship fund is empty. It is completely gone. There is only $12 left in the reserve account." Pandemonium immediately erupted in the sanctuary. Dozens of people stood up shouting questions and demanding answers. Pastor Davis rushed to Brother Thomas, grabbing the phone to look at the screen himself. The heavy leather-bound Bible he had been holding slipped from under his arm and slammed onto the hardwood floor with a deafening thud. He stared at the glowing digital ledger, his mouth opening and closing in silent shock. I raised my microphone, cutting through the rising chaos. 3 months ago, my mother convinced this finance committee to hire her son-in-law, Trent, as a freelance consultant to modernize your digital donation processing system, I declared, projecting the devastating truth to the back row. She vouched for him. She used her decades of influence in this church to bypass your standard security protocols. She told you he was a financial genius who would protect your assets. Chloe was backing away from the altar, shaking her head in terror as the furious eyes of the congregation began to lock onto her and her mother. "Trent did not modernize your system," I continued, ruthlessly dismantling the final pieces of their facade. "He installed a backdoor routing protocol. He siphoned exactly $27,450 from your youth scholarship fund directly into an offshore gambling account. He used the money you donated for your children's education to play virtual blackjack and buy luxury car accessories. And Beatrice knew about it. The charity board caught the discrepancy and gave him an ultimatum to repay the stolen funds by the end of the month." "Lies," Beatrice screamed, clutching her chest, as if she were having a heart attack. "It is all lies. She fabricated those bank statements. Trent is a good man." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored white blazer and pulled out a folded stack of financial wire transfers, handing them directly to Pastor Davis. "I brought the receipts," I said coldly. "You will find the exact IP addresses, the routing numbers, and the time-stamped wire transfers linking Trent directly to the stolen church funds. But that is not the worst part." I turned to face the women who had ruthlessly attacked my character all week. "The worst part is that when Trent got caught, Beatrice did not demand justice for this church. She did not report him to the authorities. Instead, she forged my signature to take out a secret mortgage on our family legacy estate. She risked our generational wealth to cover his tracks, and when that money ran out, she tried to extort me for the remaining $27,000. She threw me out of the family because I refused to reimburse this church for the money her white son-in-law stole from your children." The revelation landed like a nuclear bomb inside the sanctuary. The very community Beatrice had worshipped, the congregation she prioritized over her own flesh and blood, completely turned their backs on her in real time. Aunt Shirley pointed a furious, trembling finger at the altar. "You let that man steal from our babies," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure devastation. "You sat in my house drinking my tea, knowing he took my granddaughter's tuition money." Sister Geraldine stepped into the aisle, her face twisted in absolute disgust. "We prayed for you, Beatrice. We attacked your own daughter because you stood at that altar and swore she was the devil. But you are the one bringing thieves into the sanctuary. You are a disgrace to this community." The outrage was palpable. The women who had been ready to march down to the legacy estate to protect Beatrice were now advancing toward the pulpit with furious demands for justice. Beatrice backed away until she hit the wooden cross behind the altar, completely trapped by the mob she had intentionally incited just minutes before. Chloe was sobbing hysterically, curling into a tight ball on the carpeted floor, realizing they had nowhere left to run. Pastor Davis stared at the wire transfers in his hands, his face a mask of profound sorrow and righteous anger. He looked up at Beatrice, shaking his head slowly. The disgust in his eyes was absolute. "You used this pulpit to bear false witness against your own child to protect a thief," he said, his voice booming through the sanctuary, unamplified. "May God have mercy on your soul, Beatrice, because this congregation will not." The orchestrated illusion was permanently shattered. The ultimate matriarch had been stripped of her power, her dignity, and her protective social armor in front of the entire town. I stood quietly at the base of the altar watching the spectacular collapse of her empire, knowing my work here was entirely finished. Beatrice was not ready to surrender. With a primal screech, she lunged off the raised pulpit, her manicured hands desperately clawing for the wireless microphone I held. "Give that back to me," she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of pure panic. "You are a liar, Maya. You fabricated those documents to destroy this family." I did not flinch. I lowered my arm, letting the microphone rest against my side, looking at her with clinical detachment. "You cannot shout down a bank ledger, Beatrice," I said, my voice carrying enough weight to cut through her hysteria, even without amplification. Brother Thomas, the head of the finance committee, was trembling in the second pew. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose, his hands frantically swiping across the screen of his smartphone. He logged directly into the Greater Hope Tabernacle Administrative Banking portal. He tapped the refresh button 3 times, hoping a different number would miraculously appear. The congregation held a collective breath watching him. "Pastor, it is gone," Brother Thomas choked out, his voice echoing loudly. "Every single penny is gone. The last transaction was an outbound wire for $27,450. The routing number matches the exact offshore account listed on Maya printouts. The recipient name is NextGen Crypto Innovations, LLC. A collective wail rose from the pews. Mothers who had baked pies for months to fund that scholarship grabbed their chests. Fathers who had worked overtime to donate tithes shook their heads. The definitive real-time verification from their own trusted treasurer was the final nail in the coffin. There was no more room for gaslighting. There was no more space for Beatrice to twist the narrative into a story of corporate persecution. The financial rot was laid bare under the bright stained glass windows for God and everyone to see. Beatrice froze, her arms dropping to her sides. She turned her wild eyes toward the congregation, searching for a sympathetic face. She found none. Sister Geraldine turned her back completely and began comforting a weeping teenage girl who was supposed to receive that scholarship money next month. Aunt Shirley simply crossed her arms and glared at the altar, her expression harder than granite. "Please, you have to believe me," Beatrice pleaded, her voice dropping to a pathetic whimper. "Trent said he was investing it. He promised it would double. I did not know he was going to steal it. I wanted to help him build his business so Chloe could be taken care of." "You helped a white man steal from black children," Pastor Davis boomed, his deep baritone shaking the wooden rafters. "You brought a wolf into this sanctuary, Beatrice. You vouched for his character. You bypassed our security protocols because of your pride and obsession with status. And when you were caught, you stood at this holy altar and tried to crucify your own daughter to cover your sins." Chloe was curled on the floor near the choir stand, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The reality of her ruined life was crashing down. She had no money, no home, and the husband she worshipped had actively orchestrated this disaster. Her designer dress was wrinkled and stained with tears, but nobody in the room offered her a hand up. I watched my mother desperately trying to formulate another excuse, but the words died in her throat. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the sanctuary remained open, and a sudden disruptive noise began to bleed into the church. It started as a faint wail in the distance but quickly amplified into a piercing, deafening shriek. Sirens, multiple sirens. The flashing reflection of alternating red and blue lights began to dance violently across the massive stained glass windows, casting eerie, fragmented shadows across the burgundy carpet. The congregation shifted their attention from the disgraced matriarch at the altar to the parking lot outside. The heavy crunch of tires hitting the gravel driveway echoed through the building, followed by the loud slamming of heavy car doors. Beatrice let out a terrified gasp. She grabbed Chloe by the arm, hauling her younger daughter up from the carpet. "They are here for us, Chloe," she cried frantically, looking toward the side exit near the choir room. "Maya called the police. She is trying to send us to jail." My phone buzzed sharply in my blazer pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the caller identification. It was Leon. I accepted the call, bringing the phone to my ear while maintaining my unwavering gaze on my panicked mother and sister. "Maya," Leon said, his voice crisp and professional. "I am coordinating with the federal field office right now. The task force just arrived at the church to secure the premises and gather the financial ledgers. But they are not there to arrest your mother today. I raised an eyebrow, a cold smirk playing at the corners of my mouth. Tell me the good news, Leon. They caught the runner, Leon replied, a hint of grim satisfaction in his tone. Trent did not even make it past the TSA checkpoint at the airport. He booked a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands, using the exact offshore account he funneled the stolen church funds into. The federal authorities flagged the transaction instantly. The FBI just slapped handcuffs on him right in the middle of Terminal B. He is currently in federal custody facing multiple counts of wire fraud and grand larceny. I lowered the phone and looked directly at Chloe. The flashing blue lights from outside illuminated the sheer terror on her face. A team of federal agents dressed in dark tactical windbreakers strode through the sanctuary doors, their badges gleaming under the church chandeliers. They bypassed the congregation entirely and marched straight down the center aisle toward the altar. Beatrice and Chloe backed up against the wooden communion table, completely trapped. "You do not need to run, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent, shocked sanctuary. "The FBI is not here to arrest you today. They are just here to collect the financial records. Because your brilliant husband is already sitting in a federal holding cell. They caught him at the airport trying to flee the country with his stolen cash while leaving you here to take the fall." The two federal agents bypassed the paralyzed congregation, walking straight to Pastor Davis at the altar. They spared no glance for my mother or sister, who were backed against the communion table in shock. The lead agent requested the financial ledgers and access logs. Pastor Davis handed over the bound books and the printed wire transfers I provided moments before. He pointed a steady finger directly at Beatrice, identifying her as the sponsor who provided security clearance for the man currently sitting in an airport interrogation room. Beatrice slumped against the polished wood, her knees giving out as the magnitude of her ruin settled over her shoulders. She faced a social execution far worse than arrest for a woman who built her identity on church prestige. The congregation did not wait for a formal dismissal. They filed out of the wooden pews, their Sunday clothes rustling in the tense, quiet sanctuary. They moved in a synchronized wave of disgust. Walking down the center aisle toward the grand double doors, they passed directly by the altar where Beatrice and Chloe cowered. Not a single person stopped to offer comfort. Sister Geraldine walked past with her chin high, completely ignoring my mother and her pathetic whimpers. Aunt Shirley did not even look in their direction, treating them as if they were invisible. The people Beatrice spent decades trying to impress the community, she sacrificed my mental health to appease, completely discarded her in seconds. She was officially a social pariah, exiled from the only kingdom she cared about ruling. Chloe was in a state of hyperventilating panic on the carpeted floor. Her perfect blowout was ruined, her designer dress wrinkled beyond recognition. The fantasy world she constructed around her white startup husband was pulverized. Trent was not a millionaire visionary elevating her to the upper echelons of Atlanta society. He was an imprisoned felon who stole from children and eagerly tried to sell his wife to a faceless corporation just to buy a plane ticket to the Cayman Islands. Chloe stared down the barrel of absolute bankruptcy. Her shared bank accounts were frozen by federal investigators or drained by Trent. She had no career, no savings, and no wealthy husband to hide behind. She was nothing but a broke accessory to a massive fraud case. I turned my back on the pathetic scene at the altar and walked down the center aisle holding my head high. Bright summer sunlight hit my face as I pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the church parking lot. My town car waited precisely where my driver parked it. I slid into the back seat, checking my designer watch. It was exactly 11:45 in the morning. I had 15 minutes left until my corporate mandate took full effect. I told my driver to take me back to my downtown penthouse. I had no desire to physically attend the eviction. I hired highly competent professionals to handle the manual labor of removing the generational rot from my property. At precisely 12 o'clock noon, the local sheriff deputies pulled into the driveway of the Legacy estate. My private security contractor texted me a real-time update the moment their tires hit the pavement. They approached the front door with the court-ordered 24-hour notice to vacate clutched in their hands. They knocked loudly, demanding immediate entry. When nobody answered because Beatrice and Chloe were still weeping on the floor of the church, the deputies used the master key my attorney provided them. They walked through the spacious rooms of my grandparents' historic home, ensuring the property was clear of hostile occupants. Once the premises were secured, they signaled my waiting crew of contractors. The lock changing happened with ruthless efficiency. Heavy brass deadbolts were swapped out for high-security electronic keypads. Under my strict legal directives, the contractors began removing all personal belongings left behind by the unauthorized tenants. The designer handbags Chloe bought with stolen equity, the expensive suits Trent left in the master closet, and the fine china Beatrice polished for holiday dinners were systematically boxed up. The moving crew carried the boxes out the front door, stacking them neatly on the public curb right next to the sidewalk. The entire suburban neighborhood watched from their manicured lawns as the untouchable matriarch had her life dismantled and placed on the street corner. When Beatrice and Chloe finally arrived at the estate 2 hours later, they found themselves locked out of their own delusion. The reality of their situation hit them like a freight train as they stared at the boxes. My security contractor sent me a final message describing how Chloe tried to punch the heavy wooden door, while Beatrice collapsed onto the grass, weeping, as the neighbors openly stared at their humiliating downfall. There was no saving face now. They were completely homeless, stripped of their assets, their pride, and their community standing. They gambled everything to protect a criminal, and the house always wins. Later that evening, I sat in my penthouse watching the city lights flicker across the dark skyline. The quiet peace of my home felt deeply restorative after the chaos of the morning. My phone vibrated gently on the cool granite kitchen island. I picked it up and saw a long text message from an unsaved number, but I knew exactly who it was. The message was long and desperate. It was Chloe groveling pathetically. She wrote that she had nowhere to go, that Beatrice was staying at a cheap motel, and they had no money for food. She begged me to let her sleep on my couch, promising she would do anything to make it right. She used the word sister 3 times in the space of 2 short sentences, trying to invoke a bond she had shattered. I read the message with zero emotion. I tapped the contact information scrolled to the bottom of the screen and pressed the button to block the number permanently. 6 months passed since the night I permanently blocked my sister's number and erased the toxic core of my bloodline from my existence. The bitter summer heat of Atlanta had finally surrendered to a crisp, clean autumn breeze. I stood across the street from the Legacy estate, gripping a hot cup of black coffee. I had not sold the property to the highest corporate bidder. Instead, I had spent the last half-year gutting the generational rot Beatrice and Chloe allowed to fester inside its walls. A team of elite local contractors swarmed the property, putting final touches on a massive architectural renovation. The rotting wooden porch where my mother had slapped me was torn out and replaced with pristine reinforced mahogany. The overgrown weed-infested lawn was professionally landscaped, featuring fresh sod and drought-resistant native plants. The estate looked more magnificent than it had when my grandfather proudly turned the key decades ago. It was a beacon of reclaimed black wealth standing proudly in the neighborhood. I crossed the street, my designer boots crunching against fallen autumn leaves. Approaching the freshly paved driveway, I noticed 2 familiar cars idling near the curb. The doors opened, and out stepped Aunt Shirley and my cousin Marcus. They walked toward me with hesitant steps, clutching bakery boxes and foil-wrapped casseroles. These were the exact same relatives who formed a hostile mob against me on the 4th of July. Now that Beatrice was living in a cramped apartment and Trent was awaiting trial, they miraculously found time to pay their respects to the actual owner. "Maya, sweetheart," Aunt Shirley called out, forcing a painfully tight smile across her face. She adjusted her grip on a massive pound cake box. "We heard the construction was wrapping up today. We wanted to come by and bless the new house. Family sticks together through the rebuilding seasons." I stopped at the edge of the driveway, blocking their path. I did not return her smile or extend my hands to accept their baked goods. I just looked at them with the clinical, detached gaze of a woman completely immunized against their emotional manipulation. "There is no rebuilding season for you here, Aunt Shirley," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the hum of power tools buzzing in the background. "You do not get to curse me in the summer and break bread with me in the fall." Marcus stepped forward, puffing out his chest, trying to invoke male authority. Come on, Maya, he said, attempting a casual brotherly tone. We were all dealing with heavy emotions back then. Trent scammed us too, remember? We lost our money just like your mother lost this house. We were hurt and confused. You cannot hold a grudge forever against your own blood. We are here to apologize and make things right. You are not here to apologize, Marcus, I countered, cutting through his pathetic rationalization. You are here because you backed the wrong horse. You supported Beatrice because you thought she held the keys to the kingdom. You defended a white con artist because you thought his proximity to imaginary wealth would somehow elevate you. You only care about making things right now because you want to ensure your invitation to the next family gathering is securely in the mail. Aunt Shirley gasped, clutching the bakery box to her chest. Maya, that is an incredibly cruel thing to say. We are your elders. We prayed for you. You prayed for my downfall, Shirley, I corrected her, refusing to let her use her age or religion as a shield. You sat in the front pew of Greater Hope Tabernacle and watched my mother try to crucify my character to cover up a felony. You called me a disgrace to our ancestors. But my grandfather did not break his back working 3 jobs so his descendants could enable criminals. He built this house for people with integrity. You lost your right to walk on this grass the day you stood by and watched my mother trade my identity. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but the absolute finality in my eyes stopped him cold. He looked at the magnificent brick estate and then down at the concrete sidewalk. He finally understood that my wealth was not a communal trough they could dip their hands into whenever they felt financially vulnerable. Take your pound cake and go home, I commanded, pointing toward their idling vehicles. If either of you steps foot on this property again, I will immediately have my security team cite you for trespassing. And if you attempt to contact me or my firm, I will pursue legal harassment charges. They did not say another word. The sheer force of my boundaries completely stripped them of their usual argumentative tactics. They turned around, their shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked back to their cars. I watched their taillights disappear down the street, permanently closing the final chapter on the parasitic branches of my family tree. I turned my full attention directly back to the massive brick estate. The lead contractor stepped out the front door, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He nodded to me, indicating the exterior work was finally complete. 2 workers stood by the front porch, holding a large canvas tarp that covered a massive bronze plaque mounted directly beside the heavy mahogany door. Ms. Williams, the contractor, called out, a proud smile on his face. We are ready for the grand reveal whenever you are ready. I walked slowly up the newly poured concrete pathway, ascending the front steps, with a deep sense of absolute, unshakable victory. I gave the lead contractor a firm nod to proceed. He pulled the thick, heavy canvas tarp away, letting it drop to the solid floorboards below. The bright autumn sunlight caught the polished bronze lettering, illuminating the bold, powerful inscription that permanently declared exactly what this historic Black property had been transformed into for the future. The heavy bronze plaque gleamed under the clear autumn sky. I read the words engraved deep into the metal aloud to the gathering of local press and community leaders standing behind me. The Harrison Incubator for Black Female Entrepreneurs. Fully funded and permanently endowed by Apex Holdings. The name honored my grandfather using his actual surname rather than the toxic legacy my mother tried to attach to this soil. He worked until his hands bled to secure a foundation for his descendants. I did not build this estate so a white con artist could gamble it away while his own daughter cheered him on. He built it as a fortress of opportunity, and today I was permanently sealing that fortress against any future parasites. The lead contractor handed me a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors with gleaming silver blades. I turned to face the crowd that had assembled on the newly manicured lawn. There were no fake church aunties looking for a free meal. There were no greedy cousins waiting for a handout. The audience consisted of business leaders, investors, and 30 brilliant young Black women who had just been accepted into the incubator inaugural cohort. These women were fierce, intelligent, and hungry for success. They were everything my sister Chloe refused to be, and everything my mother could never understand. I snipped the thick red ribbon and the crowd erupted into genuine applause. I invited everyone inside, stepping over the threshold of the house that once served as my personal, emotional prison. The transformation of the interior was absolute. The suffocating floral wallpaper and heavy velvet drapes my mother hoarded were entirely gone. The dining room where Beatrice delivered her extortion ultimatum over a plate of candied yams was now a sleek, collaborative workspace equipped with high-speed fiber optics and ergonomic drafting tables. The living room where my sister paraded her fraudulent husband, like a king, was converted into a state-of-the-art presentation boardroom featuring interactive smart screens and rows of executive seating. I walked through the bright corridors, listening to the vibrant chatter of young women networking and pitching business ideas. They were discussing tech startups, logistics companies, and sustainable agriculture. They were not begging for handouts or forging signatures to steal equity. They were building their own tables from scratch. This was what real generational wealth looked like. It was not a stagnant house filled with entitled relatives waiting to drain the life out of whoever was successful. It was an active launching pad for people who actually wanted to put in the hard work to elevate themselves and their communities. As I stood by the massive bay window in the new conference room, I let my mind drift briefly to the people who were completely absent from this victory. I knew exactly where they were because my legal team kept me insulated from their desperate attempts to reconnect. Trent was currently sitting in a federal penitentiary facility 2 states over, serving a mandatory minimum sentence for wire fraud and embezzlement. Chloe divorced him the day after his sentencing, trying to play the victim one last time. But the damage to her reputation was absolute and irreversible. With no skills, no wealth, and no husband to hide behind, she was forced to move into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. She shoved a crumpled paper bag out the drive-through window, her fake sympathetic victim persona completely replaced by bitter misery. She tried to complain to the driver about how her rich ex-husband had unfairly ruined her life, weaponizing her white tears in a desperate bid for sympathy. Instead of validating her, a 16-year-old shift manager marched over and loudly reprimanded her for holding up the line, ordering her to wipe down the soda machine immediately. Chloe wiped her eyes with a grease-stained napkin, entirely stripped of the power she once wielded when she was stealing my family funds. While they suffocated under the crushing weight of their own catastrophic choices, I was thriving in a completely different atmosphere. I stepped away from the window of my sleek new high-rise office located in the most prestigious financial district of downtown Atlanta. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, illuminating the gleaming silver lettering embossed right on my heavy glass door. Sterling and Maya Forensics was officially open for business, and we were dominating the industry. Working directly under the mentorship of Judge Vivian Sterling had catapulted my independent auditing career into the absolute stratosphere. The multi-million-dollar federal contract we secured had allowed me to hire a dedicated team of elite investigators, turning my solo practice into a formidable powerhouse. A young woman in a sharp gray suit approached me, her eyes bright with ambition. She shook my hand firmly and thanked me for fully funding her logistics startup. She told me this incubator was the only reason she could afford to launch her company without predatory loans. I smiled warmly and told her she earned every single penny of her seed money through her own hard work and brilliant dedication. I watched her walk away, her head held high, and knew my grandfather would be immensely proud of what this land had finally become. I walked out the back door, stepping onto the newly constructed mahogany porch, where my mother once slapped me in a fit of delusional rage. The air was cool and peaceful. There was no screaming, no manipulation, and no financial extortion. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet scent of autumn leaves and absolute unshakable freedom. I had faced the darkest, ugliest parts of my family tree, and I had burned the diseased branches to the ground. I did not just survive their betrayal. I completely conquered it and replaced their rot with a legacy of undeniable power. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family to save yourself and protect your future? Let me know in the comments below.